The following program is a Town of Colony television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, but I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round again, the years keep rolling.
Top of the day. I'm Joe Doolittle, and this is Story by Story.
Celebrating the human spirit. I'm Kate Dutton.
And we're kind of storytelling partners. We often describe ourselves as being married to other people.
Oh yeah, we're both married, but to other people.
And, you know, I was thinking today, I was seeing how wonderful summertime is in upstate New York, and part of that, Kate, was our drive Sunday up to Lake George to hear you do your program at Weowaka. I was, you know, when you drive into the Weowaka, which is a retreat for women that was started in the 1890s by the socialites of the world, the Trasks and the Peabodys and the Cluets, for working women. But it's just like going back in time. I felt like that wandering guy that found Brigadoon, and it was just delightful. And the fellowship was super, but your stories, I mean, you brought Georgia O'Keeffe to life.
I told two stories. One about her paintings, but using her own words. She published a book 10 years before she died in her 80s, and one page was a reproduction of a piece of art of hers, and the other was her commentary on it. So, and in the introduction, she said, I wrote this book because so many odd things have been written about my works.
I thought it was really remarkable, and I was talking with Gay's my wife, my real wife, not Kate, but it was really like a good reinforcement for one of the adages of storytelling. We remember moments, we don't remember days, and each one of those paintings she described, it was the moment that she drilled it down. You know,
the renovation is going on here at the Colony Town Library, so any odd noises you hear in the background, just ignore.
But each one was a very precise moment that you built on in bringing her to us as the audience. It was just great, just great. And then you had the rush of the water outside on the rocks. It was really...
Yes. And the second story is a brand new one about my visiting her home at Abiquiu. It was her second home, within 15 miles of the first home in New Mexico, but it had a garden. And it also had a view.
Yeah.
And a lot of the information in that story I got from a cookbook that her companion near the end of her life had written. She said, I met Georgia O'Keeffe when she was 90 and I was 24, and she taught me how to cook delicious yet simple meals with fresh ingredients. But she had these little commentaries above the recipes, which I poured over. And
what was the line? Because a lot of her paintings from this house feature this mountain, and I can't remember the name of the mountain.
Well, it's from their other house. It's Perdonal.
Perdonal, and her line about this mountain was that
God promised me that if I painted it enough, He would give it to me.
And there you are. Isn't that a wonderful thought? And you know, it makes you want to go to New Mexico and be present in those places, because they are spiritual places.
Yeah, that mountain, it's a flat top mountain, and it's sacred to two native peoples in the area. It's part of their creation story. So, and she also said, what I will miss when I die is not being in the world anymore and seeing the beauty in it. But maybe if the Indians are right, maybe my spirit will still be here.
Wow.
So she had her ashes scattered at Pordenau.
Yeah.
And that area of the country is now known as Georgia O'Keeffe country.
Okay.
And so maybe she was right. God did give her the mountain, and her spirit is still there.
Well, it was,
That's obviously the end of the story.
and we got to the story by remarking how beautiful our part of the world was. We were talking about New Mexico, but we walk on the shores of Lake George. The drive up the Northway. I mean, you know, we go up and down the Northway so often, we take it for granted. And I want to give you a little trick I'm trying this summer. I'm trying to find my top 10 spots on the Northway in terms of views or presences. And the first one I've identified is the bridge going over the Hudson south of Glens Falls. Because I love the water and I love the feeling of going over there because I'm that much closer to where I'm going. And I know it because I've crossed that river. So try that because it will take the routineness out of a trip that we should really cherish because it's so pretty.
Well, I like that. And when you said Northwood, that was what I thought of first.
Oh, really?
That I grew up in southern Connecticut, and the part of the Hudson that I was familiar with was the part where the Tappan Zee Bridge is. And it's a really wide section.
Right.
And in Albany, it's sizable, but not so big. Up there, it's like I could swim across.
Yeah,
I could float across. I mean, it's not a hop, skip, and a
Well, I have a deeper spirit than you. I could probably walk across.
Oh,
I'm sorry.
okay.
That was a tall tale.
But that, and I also think when I go over it, it's narrowing because we're getting near its source,
Right.
up in the Adirondacks.
So beauty and place and spirit can come together in a story, and they can be built out of memories. And memories are important because they're that moment again. And often we see memories differently, but they're still there. Now, our guest storyteller has built a lot of her storytelling career about memories, about how to bring them out of yourself, how to share them with a listener. And we're really pleased to have Marni Gillard with us, aren't we?
Once again, yes.
Once again. Marni Gillard, welcome to our presence, our story by story.
Story by story. I have such admiration for the both of you to keep it going so well and for all that you do for the Capital Region Storytellers.
It's the amount of rehearsal we do.
We asked Marni, is there just one question that started off the conversation? She told us. And that was a 5-second rehearsal.
Well, yeah. Sometimes we think it through, but often we build...
Marni thought it through.
Marni's thought it through.
Yes.
Well, at least one of us has to, Kate.
Yes.
No, I've learned a lot by being around Marni. I've learned about enthusiasm. I've learned about sharing the spirit of the world in life. She's touched a number of storytellers and people. First of all, as a teacher. Second of all, as a whole circle of friends. She organizes a retreat every summer coming up at Pyramid Lake up in the Adirondacks, speaking of trips up the Northway. And it's been a remarkable ride. I wonder how, I've never asked her this question, I mean, ask her the question, will you?
How did you become a storyteller, Marni, and a story teacher?
Well, I actually probably have to trace it all the way back to childhood. Not so much that we had stories told a lot in our family. I regret not understanding about storytelling and asking all the people in your home, to tell you stories.
Exactly.
But my grandfather was an Irish American, born in America, although his mother came from Ireland. And he would stand at the piano because his children were all singers, and all the grandchildren had learned to be singers. And he would stand at the piano and say, tell the story, meaning feel the words, feel what it is you're singing about. Don't just sing the words and think about the notes. Enter the story. Well, years passed, and I was a school teacher, and I loved reading aloud. I really loved reading aloud and getting children to learn how to hold a book and be able to look up and read with expression. So that was a goal every single year. And then his fellow teacher, Owen South, who was also a wonderful storyteller, said to me, Marni, you've got to find storytelling. And I said, what's storytelling? And it just happened that very soon after that conversation, Oneonta State, the college at Oneonta, was doing a day-long workshop with a keynote by Janine Laverty and workshops all day long on different aspects of storytelling. And then she did a concert at night. And as I drove home from that day, I knew my life had changed. My life had changed. I was going to turn my read aloud unit into a storytelling unit starting Monday.
Starting Monday.
And the students and I, my middle schoolers in Niskayuna, would learn together the art of storytelling. And we did, and eventually I wrote a whole book about that, storyteller, story teacher.
Do you have a copy with you?
Well, I have a used copy.
I have a used copy too.
Yes.
Because it's not in print anymore. It had 12 good years. Adolescence is where my daughter, storyteller, story teacher, is right now, in adolescence. But you have to go to Amazon and get it used, which is what I do now too. And I buy. It won an Ann Izzard Storytelling Choice Award, which was such a thrill for me when I got that award and got to go downstate and have a big library group give me and other people. But what I'd love to tell about is the very first time after that day-long conference when I went to a new story group that had just recently started at the Scotia Library called the Story Circle. Not sure it was of the Capital region at that point yet, but definitely Story Circle. And I went to a little upstairs room in the Scotia Library. I'll never forget it. It's just so cozy and quiet, and there were probably 7 or 8 people from the area that already called themselves storytellers, and I thought, well, I'll just go and listen. But Janine Laverty, who'd been that keynote speaker and concert giver, really, just weeks before in Oneonta, she was telling, other people were telling, and finally, everybody had told except me. And I was only there to listen, which is something we all know if you give workshops. Oh no, I just came to listen. But she said to me, well, we still have time, so why don't you tell us something that you read every year to your students? And I said, well, I'm in middle school, so I don't tend to read alouds quite in the same way, or don't have favorites that I would read every year. Although there's a poem I know, a long narrative poem, and I don't know it by heart, called The Mountain Whippoorwill by Stephen Vincent Benet. And Janine said, well, is it a story? Does it tell a story? I said, oh yes, it very much tells a story about a boy who went to a fiddling contest down in Georgia. She said, all right, go back to the beginning. How do you see the boy in the beginning of the story? What's he like? What happens when he goes to the fiddling contest? And I'll tell you, my stomach was in knots. I said, oh, Stephen Vincent Benet would roll over in his grave to think that I'm just going to tell it like a story. She said, oh, I think his spirit would love you telling it like a story, because it was a story. So I began. And I won't do the whole poem for you now, although I've gone back and committed most of it to memory. But I had to enter the story in a way I never had, though my students and I had for years read it aloud. There were solo voices and dark voices and light voices. But I had to say, up in the mountains, and I did remember the beginning, it's lonesome all the time. Soft wind slewing through the sweet potato vine. Up in the mountains, it's lonesome for a child. Whippoorwills calling when the sap runs wild. Up in the mountains in the fog, why everything's as lazy as an old hound dog. And then I couldn't remember the words anymore. And I was so terrified. But she just looked at me like, go ahead. Just tell us the story. She didn't say a word. She just like encouraged me. And that kind of encouragement has stayed with me and stayed with the way I teach storytelling the rest of my life. What I did was I had to picture the boy getting to the big fair in Georgia where he slapped a silver dollar and said, there's my calling card, and anyone that licks me will have to fiddle hard. And I knew that line. I loved that line. But then I had to go back into seeing the big fiddlers laughing, slapping their knees, somebody saying, there's one dead dollar. And find my way through the boy losing his confidence as he saw fiddler after fiddler get tons of applause. And he said to himself, whippoorwill, that was what he called his fiddle, you can sing no more. And he thought about just getting up and leaving. But he said, nah, I was alone where I was raised, and this audience isn't going to get me fazed. And he stepped in and he picked up his fiddle and he thought about the squirrels in the mountains where he'd grown up, those images, the memories, you know. He thought about God lying sleeping in his big white beard, you know, his image. And then he went through actually country images and Bible images and so many things, and that's the way he played. And I could do that part pretty well. And finally at the end, when he stopped strumming, there wasn't a sound. I thought, I've fiddled all night and lost. You're a good hillbilly, but you've been bossed. So the boy went to congratulate Old Man Dan, the best of the fiddlers, and he put his fiddle into the boy's hand. And then the noise of the crowd began. And that's the way Stephen Vincent Benet finishes the poem. And I learned, oh my gosh, I got all the way through that story. And you still, and I knew it from doing it with the kids, you have to stop for a minute because the audience is also in awe listening to the story. And then they kind of come out of that trance and are ready to applaud. And it taught me you have to enter the story. You have to get in there. You have to feel it, face it, whatever's in there, and face how much of it in some ways about yourself. I'd grown up with a lot of competition. and I learned that poem in the 9th grade and thought, I think this is a stupid poem because I was in a little drama class and I was like a Southern boy. What's it have nothing to do with me? But of course, I'd been teaching it for about 10 years to my students, and I realized how much it had to do with me. That's my story.
Oh, man. And you kind of got pushed into that story.
Oh, yes.
Well, pushed and pulled and
Pushed, nudged, lured, and I do remember Janine's face to this day. Just hang in there. We're with you. And everybody, I looked around, people were with me. And it was so much like the fiddler, really, of just entering the song, the fiddle, the
newbie in the...
Absolutely, the newbie himself. I mean, he was a good fiddler. He knew he was a good fiddler.
Right.
But not in a world of staged fiddling, the way storytelling can be staged and your heart can pound, depending on the concert or whatever.
Yeah, I found that storytellers are the best listeners.
Oh,
and
yes.
you know, people go, "Oh, I don't want to tell in front of storytellers." I go, "No," and even if you make a mistake, they are with you, and they've made that mistake, and they will know that you know that really wasn't the best word, but that doesn't matter.
Yeah.
That doesn't matter. They know that you're creating something, and sharing it with all your heart.
Oh, there's no question about it. And one time, this is a small little anecdote, I was at a big outdoor concert, and it was hot. It was really, really hot. And there was a famous storyteller in the audience that I was trying to impress. And I had kind of committed to myself that this was a story I'd known since I was a very little girl. And I wanted to find a new layer of meaning in it. And I knew there were layers in there because women would come up and say, you know what that story's about for me, or what that story's about for me. And I thought it was a little girl's story, but it's really a woman's story in many ways, called The Star Dipper. And I let myself go into the story in a deeper way because the woman was there. And then I saw something in the story that I'd never seen before. And because it was such a hot day, when she dipped the dipper into the spring to fill it with water, instead of just starting home to give it to drink to her mother, she poured it over her own head. And in the storytelling, I did that, and I felt the coolness of invisible water. And I knew, you have to feed yourself well in order to feed the world, so to speak. And that insight came to me that day. Oof, that was exciting. I never did talk to the famous storyteller afterwards, thinking she might give me great praise, you know how we are. I think she was gone by that time or something. It was just an all-day thing. So, but it was, you learn so many things through storytelling.
Yeah, that's for sure. That's for sure. And in case you're interested out there, Story Circle still has monthly meetings. I can never remember until I look at my calendar, but it's the third
Tuesday on the odd months and the third Wednesday on the even months. This isn't an intelligence test. It's more because some people do something every Tuesday night and some people do something every Wednesday night. So that's why it's started. But it's on the website, and there'll be a slide of coming attractions as to when it is in August.
So if you're interested in coming to listen or to be a new storyteller, or to see if you're a new storyteller, we'd love to see you at those sessions. They're fun, and they're interesting, and we all learn something, and we all have a very good time.
The only rule is no reading. That you can come with, you know, I have this idea, and I don't know what to do with it. It can be that way, or it can be, this is a story I've told a lot, but not recently, and I need to warm it up because I'm going to be telling it at a performance. So anywhere in between those two extremes of a story under development is welcome. And you can get feedback, you can get no feedback. It's up to you. We try to be extremely kind. We know it's like, your story's like a new baby, and new babies, they often have little rashes, or their head might be a little lumpy because they just come through a small space.
Well, there's a moment to remember right there. We'll come back to Marni. It's summertime, and we've got some storytelling going on, and we'll have some storytelling going on in the fall. But Kate, why don't you kind of tell us what's going on and people might want to take a little advantage of?
Well, my first slide is what's not going on. There are 4 storytelling series that take the summer off. First Tuesday's Tales and Stuff in the Stockade in Schenectady, the Saratoga Storytelling Open Mic, which will be every 4th Wednesday of the month at Cafe Lena. It's going to be there, except for December, because the 4th Sunday happens to be Christmas. And
Fourth Wednesday, yeah.
4th Wednesday of the month. So it's always going to be there, and we'll be doing 3 special programs at where we used to be half the time.
Over at the Wesley. Oh, that's
Yes.
great. That's great, because that was a good thing to do.
Right.
Great.
We have sort of a captive audience. Well, they have to get to the room where we're telling, but nonetheless. And then Shawnee evenings at the Irish American Heritage Museum. That'll also be back in September, and the Interfaith Story Circle program will be back in September.
Wow.
But something that only comes
See
in...
you in September.
But speaking of Weowaka, Marni will be at Weowaka on Tuesday, August 7th from 9 to noon, mining the gold of your memories. And you can see the number on the slide there of where you can call to make a reservation. So if and you don't have to be wanting to be a professional storyteller telling. You might want to be, if you're a grandparent, just coming up with things to share with your grandchildren. That would be a true blessing. There's that gap in the chain of a family is a very nice one, a special one that is quite different than parent and child. A very wonderful storyteller, Odds Bodkin. I saw him once. I was so excited. I said, "Oh, my family listens to your tapes whenever we're driving on vacation." And he said, "My boys won't let me do that." You really, it's hard to get a lot of appreciation from your old child, but your grandchild, oh, that's something else. So, or wherever you are in your life cycle, mining the gold of your memories is well worth your time. I've studied with Marni, and she's just as wonderful as a teacher as she appears here. This is Marni that you're seeing. This is not Marni on stage or on TV. So, highly recommend that. Then, there's also a series that only happens in the summertime. Not just for kids, at Schoharie Crossing in Fort Hunter, New York, just west of Amsterdam, Sundays at 6 p.m. And
that's a great place to come a little early and bring a picnic. And there are two spots within the historic site that are just perfect for picnics. One right at the storytelling spot, one up near an old lock. And it's the best kept secret in the Capital District, I think. So I encourage you to try that one out.
And they have some wonderful people coming in August and in September. Jennifer Monroe is from the Connecticut, Massachusetts area. Andy Orford Irwin is from Georgia. And he is remarkable. He tells very funny stories. He's created a character ant. But they're funny, but there's usually a moment where the story turns and you realize there's a lot of heart in that story too. And our own Nancy Marie Payne will be there, and on the 19th and on the 26th, and finishing off August, is Anne Shimojima, a wonderful storyteller from the Chicago area, and her parents were interned during the World War II. And they didn't talk about it. That's where they met. All her father said was, well, if we hadn't been interned, we never would have met. But she has mined those stories. And she's a delightful person, too. And then ending off is our own Claire Nolan, who will be our guest next month.
Oh, that's right.
We're taping in July for our August show, so we tape with Claire Nolan in August for our September show. We're sort of traveling through time.
Right.
Yeah.
Brigadoon and all that.
No, it's something like that. Anyways, our next Story Circle meeting will be at the Pine Hills Branch Library in Albany on August the 15th, Wednesday. And then I will, Joe, you have something on the 25th.
Yeah, Kent Bushman and Joe Peck and I are part of the Schoharie River Center Creative Writers Retreat, and it's a feature on stories of the watershed. And the Schoharie River Center is a not-for-profit organization that works with youth and gets them involved in monitoring about 20 of the rivers. They actually have a contract with NCON, and this is a fundraiser. And we'll be telling stories from 1 o'clock on Saturday till about 2:30, and it's going to be a lot of other things going on there. So go to the website, pick up that idea, and Burtonville, New York is Brigadoon in New York. You couldn't find it if you went looking for it. You have to try, and it's a great place, and you're right along the creek, and you'll be with some really wonderful folks. So there you go.
Thank you. And then, a few days later, I will be back at Weowaka. They have, in addition, Georgia O'Keeffe Week, which was in July. They have a women's lecture series every Tuesday night, starting in July and August. And I will be finishing that series telling stories about women who made a difference. And I'm calling it part 2 because I told stories of women who made a difference last year, but these are different women. A young woman involved in the civil rights movement, a very experienced pilot who desperately wanted to become an astronaut, Mary Martin, and then stories of a very young woman, 11-year-old, and a 25-year-old who made a difference. One of them helped strangers. And the other one helped birds who were mucked up from an oil spill. So that'll be Tuesday, August 28th at 7 p.m. You can just come for the talk, and that has a small fee. You can come for dinner, and that also, of course, has a fee. We had a wonderful dinner.
We had a great dinner. I would come for dinner, man.
Yes.
They know how to do things right up there.
Chicken enchiladas, rice with beans, cooked corn and squash, and then lemon squares.
Lemon squares for dessert.
And
I
mango
was right there.
sherbet. Sweet tea, lemonade, and water. And it's right on the east bank of Lake George, just like a mile and a half out. But unlike the west side, which is crammed with businesses and restaurants, and they have this whole long section of shore.
It's just beautiful.
The boats do go by, whoa, and sometimes you can hear the
calliope.
And there people hang gliding, but they don't make a lot of noise, and there aren't a lot of speedboats. So, just to now get your calendars out. Write down our 12th season at Proctor's in Schenectady. Here are it will be September, October, January, February, and March. Mavericks, Irresistible, Starting Over, Inside Out, and Shenanigans. And then our celebration topic on November 18th is Sparks. And a call for stories is going to be coming out shortly on that morning. So that's all I have, but if you can't make it to any of these performances, we are as close as your computer, that we have over 200 stories that you can listen and watch on demand if you go to storycircle@proctors.org and click on YouTube. And in fact, your Star Dipper story, Marni, is available there.
Yes.
That's right. That's right.
So I should maybe mention that on your slide.
Kate, can I say one other thing about your Weowaka performance?
Well, you just want to say Weowaka again because it's such
I
a
love to
wonderful
say
word
Weowaka,
to say.
yeah. I was listening to you and watching the slides, and I said to myself, boy, this performance is a long way from guerrilla storytelling. You want to tell us what guerrilla storytelling is?
I lurk when I'm in an art museum. I lurk next to a painting that I have a story about. And I lurk over to the side, and I watch people come and absorb the painting. And just as they're starting to move, I go, "Excuse me, I have a quick story about this painting. Would you like to hear it?" And they almost invariably go, "Okay." And so then I launch into, like Monet once said, "I wish I had been born blind, and then could suddenly see. And then I could just paint the colors I see in front of me and not be distracted by the objects."
Ooh. Whoa.
And I'm standing right next to one of the paintings he painted using that idea. I love finding out what the painters, what they were trying to accomplish.
I had to have her share that story because I have never done that yet. But I'm certain to, there's an exhibit up at the Hyde on Rockwell, Kent, of scenes from the Adirondacks. And I think I'm going to brief up on that, and I'm going to do a little guerrilla storytelling. It's just to see how it goes. And with thoughts of gorillas in my mind. Well, you do guerrilla story. You do guerrilla story your way, and I'll do guerrilla story my way.
Just gorilla has.
Now, Marni Gillard has nothing to do with a gorilla, but she has a lot to do.
As far as we know.
As far as we know, but she has a lot to do with storytelling and with memories. And we talked about when you started. You've done so many wonderful things for storytelling. Is there a point of reference where you actually began to feel kind of where you weren't ever frightened to tell a story, or really were confident, or?
Well, yes.
Oh, really?
But I did get ambushed, which is the kind of guerrilla activity you're talking about. I did get ambushed once to tell a story that I had no intention really of telling, and here's the way that goes. It's also another story about learning about the art of storytelling. To me, these are process stories, the way your guerrilla stories are. These are reflecting on how we learn to be the storytellers we become. And storytellers come in many sizes, shapes, and styles. When you were discussing, somebody can be so funny and then have a way of turning a story to touch your heart. Well, after I had had that experience and done some storytelling at the Story Circle, I actually did have a one little fun job at a church bazaar, and they were paying me $25, and I thought I was the richest person in the world. I get to do this and get paid, but that had a lot of noises in the background. Oh my gosh, the
Kind of like today
wheel.
with the dental drill.
Yes,
How big is that tooth anyway, do you think?
But it was a great learning experience. But then I heard that there was a week-long retreat for people in storytelling, and that a very well-known storyteller, Jay O'Callahan, would be the keynote teller and workshop giver all week long. And I wanted to get to know Jay O'Callahan. I'd seen him a little bit, and I'd heard about him from my friend Doug Lipman, who was his friend, and they kind of co-coached each other, and I was interested in that process. And it was in Rochester, New York, offered by a man named Rafe Martin, who's both a storyteller and a very established children's book writer, and I wanted to go. So I packed up my little boy, who was probably about 8 years old at the time, and my sister lived in Rochester, so she would babysit him, but we wanted to be sure that they could come over and see the performances, and we got permission for that, and that was fine. Well, during that week, there were lots of workshops, and you often get a prompt, just a short little prompt to start a story, and they'll say, turn to a partner, and the prompt was, what's the first time you made any money that you thought was a lot of money? A lot of money? Well, I could go for my first paycheck as a teacher, but no, another memory pushed its way through of when I was in the 4th grade, and the junior choir director in our church, who was also our music teacher in school, had asked me after choir practice one night, would you come at 7 in the morning and sing the Mass for the young priest, and then stay for 7:30 and sing the Mass for the pastor, and then I'll take you home to my house, and I'll get you some breakfast and get you back to school, Catholic school it was, Holy Family School in Fulton, New York, and we'll get you to school on time at 9 o'clock. I was like, oh, yeah, that would be great. So that was a memory, but the thing about the money was that right when I finished that first morning, the organist took me down into the church sacristy, a place where really just the priest and the altar boys would go. I thought she must have had a dispensation from the Pope or something for women to go in at that time. We're talking about 1961. And we walked in, and the priest said, "Oh, my pearl of a girl," which was a nickname that he had for me because my real name is Marguerite, and in his mind that was a word that meant pearl. So he said, "I've got some insurance for you." And he gave me a $5 bill, brand new from the bank, really crisp, and said, "But that's not just for today, that's so you'll keep coming." And I went home the happiest girl that day. I just felt smart, and it was great. And that $5 felt like the most money I had ever made. I think in our house we might have gotten a quarter for doing chores or things like that, but that $5 felt like a lot. So that was my story that I told in the workshop. But the week finished, and we'd had such wonderful performances by Jay, these long stories that he would write and enter the characters. I just learned so many things. And we'd even had a big workshop where everybody who wanted to could just stand up quick and tell a story about the 4th of July, because it had been the 4th of July weekend. And I had told a little story about my family celebrating the not 1776, but 1976, something like that. Some kind of big party we'd had with a cake that looked like a flag, and my aunts all sang barbershop quartet harmony, "This is my country." So I had told that little story just very casually. But then, the end of the week, Rafe Martin stood in front of the last gathering of all the storytellers who had come, and there were a good 50, 60 people, I think. And he said, "This is a story swap, a final story swap, but I'm challenging people not to tell a story that you're really good at, a story you think is, yeah, this is my best story." Because that's sort of showing off, and there's nothing wrong with that, but to learn, you want to push yourself ahead, push yourself forward. So I challenge you to tell a story that came up in you this week, and see what it's like to tell it again in front of a fabulous listening audience. Storytellers are a really good listening audience, as you said before, Kate. And I had no intention of being there and saying, "Oh, I've got one." I just sat there waiting for somebody to say, "I'll go first." But my 10-year-old was sitting next to me, or 8, whatever he was, Brian. He took my hand, raised it in the air, and said, "My mom will."
You gotta love a kid like that.
There was no turning back after that point. So I walked up on stage, and I started, and I basically took myself through the story as I had told it in the workshop, just a few minutes, and how the money was the thing that the story was about. But when I was on the stage, and I'm looking both at my son, my sister, several other tellers that I know well, I suddenly found myself saying, "And boy, I went to the teacher's house for breakfast, and wow, we had this and this." And then next thing I know, I'm at school, and I feel like the smartest girl in the class. I'm raising my hand for every answer, even if I don't know it, just feeling like the right thing will come out my mouth. I was so high from being acknowledged that I had done well. And then in my classroom, my 4th grade classroom, there was a knock at our door. And part of my brain is telling the story. And part of my brain is saying, "Where is this story going, Marni? You are past the most important thing, which was the money. So what's going to be the most important thing in this version of it?" And then suddenly I knew it was the knock at the door and the young priest, who was a very strict man, very different from the jolly old, "Oh, my pearl of a girl" pastor. And he walked into our classroom, but I was still so high. I thought, he probably wants to call me out in the hall and give me some more compliments. 9 years old. I can't wait. And sure enough, he didn't look at me, but he spoke to the nun who was our teacher, and then he left. And then the teacher looked at me and said, Marguerite, Father would like to speak with you out in the hall. And something about the tone in her voice told me it wasn't necessarily going to be a compliment. But I stood up, and my friends are all going, tell us what he says, tell us what he says. And I'm like, hush, hush. And I walk out the door, and I look up. He was a very tall man in a long black cape. We often called him Dracula because of that cape. But I was there to talk with him. And I said, good morning, Father. And he looked down and said, Marguerite, you did well for a little girl this morning, but, and he paused, and I knew he was trying to find out another way to say, you didn't do well. And what he said was, but your voice as a child, it's simply not ripe yet. You know, like how apples get ripe, and that's when they're ready. And I knew about apples because we had an apple tree, and I knew about rotten apples, but there was nothing that was going to come out my mouth. I just kept looking at him. And he said, I want you to tell the organist you're not going to do this anymore. It was very inappropriate of her to ask a child to do this. She needs to get an adult, and there are many adult choir members that could do this. And all I knew how to say was, yes, Father. And I walked inside the classroom, and I sat down, and I didn't want to tell anybody about what he'd said. Now, at that point in telling the story, I knew I couldn't leave my audience sunk. I looked around, and everybody was sad and mad. And my sister had tears streaming down her face. And I realized she's not crying about me. She's crying about herself. And times that someone has told her, she's a very good singer, that she wasn't good enough. And I just wrapped it up by saying, so I waited till I got home, and when my mom said, well, how did it go? I burst into tears, finally, tears that I had held inside all day long, because my brothers told me when I was young, don't be a crybaby in school. And I cried, and she said, all right, I will handle this. And it was like my mother was a bear, a mother bear. And she never told me how she fixed it, but she did. And after that, I was pretty soon singing every day. And I got to sing at weddings and funerals. And you make a lot of money when you do that. And that's the way I ended the story that day. And learned, wow, a lot about the art of storytelling.
Whoa!
When your son throws you into the lake,
Right.
you can come out, spouting.
Just as a little
Almost
aside,
fun.
when we do this, we're actually applauding. This is a convention of the Interfaith Story Circle to give a positive response to a teller without breaking the mood. And what a mood. That was amazing. And you were 9.
And I was 9. It was a life-changing moment, really, at 9, but only in adulthood have I mined the gold of all that first experience being called to be a performer, being paid by one person, and just hours later being told by another person that I wasn't appropriate in being a child. And to this day, I love that. I call it the story of the young priest, and there's more to that story. I made a CD many, many years ago. It's the only CD I've made about life moments in my girlhood, and I call it Without a Splash, diving into childhood memories, because that's the perfectionist thing that many children, me included, got raised in, with, being the best. And it's a tough thing, perfectionism. It kind of haunts us even in adulthood.
Yes. I can't get over Father Dracula.
Father Dracula.
Telling you to tell the organist how
Yes.
inappropriate that was.
Oh yes, I've mined that memory many times.
I'm going, if he had a problem with the organist, he should have gone to the organist and not dumped on this little girl. Jeez. Very, very
Well, the organist would have hit him upside of the head.
Well.
Well, that's great.
Actually, years later, I got to visit the nuns who raised me in that Catholic school. They live in a big mother house down in Sparkill, New York. We always thought it was Sparkle. And I told them the long story, and also that it's a nice ending, that I resolved some things with the priest 4 years later when I'm in 8th grade, and I'm much more mature.
The young
Yes,
Father
the young
Dracula.
priest. Yes, we just call him the young priest.
Oh,
I'm the
okay,
pastor.
okay,
Yeah,
okay.
and the nuns said, "Oh, we taught him a lot of lessons. That young priest. We grew him up in the years that he was under our tutelage." And I loved that. I loved that they too saw the perfectionist in him that sadly some young adults get, especially in a training like to be a priest. Yeah.
So, I mean, we grew him up. I got the feeling, I don't know if you've ever seen the play Doubt.
Oh, yes.
And the nuns were very much under the control of the priests.
Right.
But they were
Watching
working
out
away.
for the young one, yeah.
And so we grew him up. Yeah, we did our best from where we were to slap him into shape. No. And then you're saying $5 was so much money. Now, we're very close in age, and I saved my Barbie. Did you have a Barbie doll?
No, I never had a Barbie doll, nor wanted one. I was not a girl looking at figures. Barbie was a figure doll, and I was not into that.
Okay, well, I had a Barbie doll, a real Barbie doll, not a knockoff. But I only had one real Barbie doll outfit, the one that she had come in. You can't buy naked Barbie dolls.
I'm over my head with this conversation.
But I got a lot of knockoff clothing that fit Barbie, and I made the first sweater I made was for Barbie, which was because she's not very big.
Sure. Yes, she was not my shape at all.
Well, I wasn't looking at. I was much younger, so the shape. She was just a doll. I had little girl dolls, and I had Barbie. Anyways, but I saved Barbie, and I had a little trunk that if she fit in and all of her things, and my young cousin Leanne. My mother would get that out of the closet, and Leanne would play with that when she came to visit. And I still have it. Barbie's up in the attic, and if little girls come, I bring her out. Well, one of the things I saved was the catalog, the clothing catalog, and you could see all the different outfits. And the last page was, of course, the bride's dress, and it cost $5, and that was completely beyond my family's capability of buying. That it was I didn't even bring it up. That was $5 was a lot of money when we were kids.
Yeah.
That it was like My father was a purchasing agent, and we were nice, middle class. We had a house, it had a small yard, you know. One car, you didn't have two cars, my goodness, no. One TV, you know, rabbit ears. Anyways,
When I tell the story, I do refer to children sitting in front of me that in those days you could buy an ice cream cone for 10 cents and a really big one for 12 cents. And you could go to the movies for a quarter. Unless it was a special Disney movie, and then maybe it was 50 cents. And they just can't believe it. It must be the dark ages, you know.
And the candy bars were this big. A Hershey's bar was this big and cost a nickel.
Right.
You know, it was like fun size. You know, that didn't exist. That's what you got on Halloween. The nickel Hershey bars. Well, we have just the 3 minutes left to wrap up today's program.
Wow.
It went quickly.
It went quickly. I do have a Barbie doll story.
I didn't know this about Joe.
This is a story that's actually true. My son and his wife, Christine, were home for the 20th anniversary of the Niskuna High School class that Ben graduated in. And my granddaughter, Ellie, was about 4. And she's playing with a Barbie doll at the top of our stairs in the house, the race ranch, go downstairs to go out the door. And Christine, my daughter-in-law, came down the hall, and she was looking like the nines. I gotta tell you, she is a very attractive person. And when she was dressed up, and her daughter looked up at her, and she looked at the Barbie doll, and she said, Mommy, you look just like Barbie. And Christine beamed, and Gay and I just went, and Ellie was right. She looked just like Barbie.
That was the best compliment.
And I was going to say,
in her world.
in one other conversation somewhat later in life, as she approached her teen years, Ellie described her mother as the crusher of her dreams. So things change. Things change. They still get along, but every once in a while there's a flare. You know?
So your granddaughter also has a way with words.
Grandchildren, children in general, but grandchildren particularly, are a fountain of material for a storyteller. I'm blessed, and the older they get, the better it gets. And sometime I'll tell the story of my bonus grandchildren, which is relationships Gay and I have acquired with kind of extended family. And that even amplifies some of the harvest of stories. So there's all sorts of ways to weave this storytelling thing into your life. And if you do it with intention, it's even better than the casual way we tend to do it. So we encouraged intentionality. But we appreciate the stories.
Yes.
And we appreciate Marni being here to share her tales and her wisdom and her joyous smile. And you, oh gorilla storyteller, you know, we've had fun today. We hope that you'll tune in again and come to some of those events.
Yes.
And do we have a benediction story?
I have a little poem that I learned at that first workshop.
We only have 10 seconds.
Oh, 10 seconds. It's not 10 seconds.
10
No.
seconds. So we thank you for coming. We hope you'll come again.
Much good cheer.
It goes all my life's a circle, sunrise and sundown. The moon rolls through the nighttime till the daybreak comes around. And all my life's a circle, I can't tell you why. Seasons spinning round,